they couldn't watch the film any longer and say that Kirk Cousins, in this current form of Kirk Cousins, gives them the best chance to win. So they go to Penix, which is a roll the dice, but they have to have seen something in practice that gives them the confidence enough that he can, at the very least, give them better football than what Cousins has been doing.
Welcome into the NFL on Fox podcast presented by Verizon, the NFL powered by Verizon 5G. I am your host, Dave Helman, and I am ready for one last weekend before the holiday season really descends upon us in all of its madness. We got Wednesday games on Christmas next week. We'll be juggling the travel and the stress and the fun and the joy of the holidays. This is one last opportunity to really settle in and just be a potato and enjoy some football. And that is going to be my goal for most of the next 5 days, because as we're about to get into, it starts Thursday, banger of a game right here in LA, which came about in interesting circumstances. That's called a teaser. Wasn't always supposed to be Chargers Broncos. We're going to get into that in a minute with our guy, Peter Schrager. Starts Thursday. If you're a college football fan like me, we've got the college football playoff kicking off on Friday. That's going to be amazing. Saturday, NFL football, two huge games, the Chiefs and the Texans, Steelers, Ravens 2.0, and then your usual Sunday fare, highlighted, in my opinion, by a fantastic game here on Fox between the Commanders and the Eagles. We're going to talk about that later on in the show. Let's get into it.
Okay, Peter, we got a loaded slate of games. We got Saturday games. It's that time of year where we got some big matchups on Saturday. We'll get to that in a minute. And I want to talk about the piece in your column about Sean Payton as well. But when you have a 5-time Pro Bowler, $180 million quarterback benched the night before we record, I think that's where you need to start. It's not surprising to me that Kirk Cousins is benched in Atlanta. Michael Penix is up to replace him against the Giants this weekend. He's played poorly enough to deserve it, but I'm still always, maybe impressed isn't the right word, but a little bit impressed when a team is willing to eat a $180 million mistake like this.
Yeah, and no matter what, Kirk Cousins will make $90 million for the 14 weeks he played for the Atlanta Falcons. If he never takes another snap again, it's $90 million.
Good money if you can get it.
It's good money, and they'll probably end up paying some of his next contract too, because you better believe it, another team next year is going to say, we can get Cousins. Yeah, let's bring in Cousins. We got a young quarterback. Let's make sure this thing works and let's figure it out. The goose has been cooked, unfortunately. Like I reported on Fox NFL Kickoff 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, before the Chargers game, I came out and reported that Cousins hadn't given up any of the first team snaps in practice and that Michael Penix was still on scout team. Then he had the awful game against the Vikings, and then he had a win against the Raiders that did not exactly show his best form. So they make the move, and it is commendable, because it would have been very easy just to take this one on the chin, say, well, we paid for him. We're going to let him ride it out, and we're not going to get Penix injured, and we're not going to get Penix scarred from some, experience if he hasn't had the first team reps. But they still view themselves as a playoff team. And at the end of the day, they couldn't watch the film any longer and say that Kirk Cousins, in this current form of Kirk Cousins, gives them the best chance to win. So they go to Penix, which is a roll the dice. But they have to have seen something in practice that gives them the confidence enough that he can, at the very least, give them better football than what Cousins has been doing. I mean, Dave, the truth of the matter is he can't move anymore. He's a statue back there. And
It's rough.
I watched the Chargers game. I watched the Vikings game. And then this last one against the Raiders. I mean, you're talking about he couldn't even move laterally 3 yards to either side. And it's heartbreaking, because I think we all have grown to love Kirk Cousins. And if you're going to see Kirk Cousins get benched, or you're going to see Kirk Cousins be removed, you want it to be because his play just simply wasn't up to snuff. And it's like, that's not fair. His health wasn't up to snuff. He could not move. He was immobile out there. And his arm strength was the unfortunate recipient of the inability for him to use his legs to get that strength. He just was throwing passes that and couldn't move that are just not what you were expecting to see from a $100 million quarterback.
I low key love this spot for Penix. I know some people have said it's a lot of pressure to put on a rookie, but he's clearly talented enough to go in the top 10. This is still a very talented Atlanta offense. If he gets them into the playoffs, he's a hero. And if he doesn't, I'm just like, okay, well, you gave the guy 3 weeks. Are you crazy? Like, how much could you ask of him? So I really view this as a no lose situation for a rookie quarterback, and I hope he takes it and runs with it. It at least it makes Atlanta much more fun than watching a very bad Kirk Cousins play out the string.
No, and I think Zach Robinson, the offensive coordinator for the Falcons, who I've had on my podcast and I've known for a long time and worked at Oklahoma State, obviously he's a quarterback himself, and then was with the Rams for many years. I think Zach has a lot of creative things that he would love to do with this offense that he simply hasn't been able to because of Cousins' limitations outside the pocket. And again, they knew that going in. They signed Cousins off an Achilles at 36 years old. Like they knew that was a possibility. I think you're going to see some different wrinkles that you haven't seen on tape, which could actually be an advantage for Michael Penix. Teams won't be ready to prepare for it because there hasn't been much tape on him at all.
It's true. I mean, he didn't really even get preseason snaps, so like you're not going on really anything other than I think he played some garbage time snaps earlier this
Couple
year.
times, yeah.
So, okay, one last thing on Kirk, and I should know better, Peter. I've done this too long to think that the NFL might not be interested in a capable quarterback. But when you look at Cousins' deal, like it would cost a team $28 million to trade for him on top of whatever you've got to pay in draft picks. And plus, more importantly, his last 6 weeks of tape are so bad. I mean, one touchdown to 9 interceptions. I am dubious that there's going to be a strong market for Kirk when we get to the offseason. At the very least, I think the Falcons would have to cut him first. Like there just can't be that big of a trade market.
Okay, so I can go off the top of my head, but for this podcast, I have jotted down some notes after conversations yesterday. Here are the options.
I want to hear them.
If they cut him before March 16th and they give him something without a June 1st designation, we'll get to that, they would still owe him $28 million guaranteed and $65 million are on their cap as a dead hit, which is just an albatross, an anchor for a team. If they release him before March 16th, but they do a post June 1st designation, it's the same cash, but they'd be able to spread that dead cap hit money over 2 years, $40 million next year, $25 million in 2026. It's a little easier. If you trade him before June next year, which he would have to agree to because he has a no trade clause.
He has that too, yeah.
They'd still have to carry a dead cap number of $38 million in 2025, but they would save about $28 million. The truth of the matter is, if Cousins remains on the roster as of March 16th, they owe him another $10 million. They're not going to want to do that. Like they're just going to have to eat money. Like they have to eat the money. The ideal is that someone trades for him in that combine period or that's so much money. And you're also
so much money and picks on top of that.
And picks. And also like, what am I getting? Like that version. I don't want that I don't want your version of Kirk Cousins. I want the version I've seen for years before the Achilles injury. So as recently as week 9 against Dallas, he looked really good. With another 6 months of training and getting back to it, can you revitalize it? Yes. But like, if you're the Giants, if you're the Raiders, is Kirk Cousins appealing? I don't know. Maybe. And then you draft a quarterback and say, all right, that it's the same situation it was in Atlanta a year ago.
Just not for $180 million.
No, it's so much money.
If this ages poorly, so be it. But I think Kirk is going to have to play this the Russell Wilson way, where I think he's a June 1 cut. Eventually, the Falcons do what they can to make this palatable on their salary cap, and in March or April, Kirk is taking flights to Nashville and East Rutherford and et cetera, et cetera. That would be my guess.
I'd love to be a member of the New York Giants. I love the tradition and the Tennessee Titans. I was a big fan of Steve McNair and growing up. And yes, that's the route he might be taking.
One last thing is, I mean, good quarterback. He's a franchise quarterback. He had some really good moments in the league. Maybe not the playoff success he would have preferred, but it's a bummer to see it end this way. Hopefully he
one of the best businessmen to ever play the game.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Like that's such a backhanded compliment for a football player, but like the way he played that franchise tag deal with Washington and then parlayed that into one of the biggest deals ever after a feeding frenzy between the Jets and the Vikings. And then to go parlay one more $100 million deal with the Falcons and walking away from Minnesota, like truly gambled on himself so many times and won every single time. And I wouldn't put it past him that he gets one more payday just based on, the way it's gone in his career.
I'll take all the backhanded compliments you want if I've got $300 million in the bank. Absolutely. All right, let's jump in. Let's jump into these Week 16 games. It's Week 16, right? Yeah. It all starts to run together. It's Week 16. Okay, you touched on this in your cheat sheet column. I thought it was a fascinating point because we know there are some big games this weekend, but I had not considered the fact that it is very much an AFC playoffs preview.
Oh.
Like all of the heavyweights, minus the Bills. The Bills get to chill and play some bad teams here over the next 3 weeks, but everybody else that's going to make the AFC playoff field. I mean, the Texans are playing the Chiefs. You got an AFC West game, Broncos, Chargers, the Steelers and the Ravens, and then they all swap on Christmas. Like we're doing our own little mini tournament here 2-3 weeks before the end of the season.
Yeah, and as Chris Russo was ranting and raving, like none of the games are on CBS, so they're just like, all right, so we have the AFC package at none of these little games. Great, thanks. Here's the truth of the matter: it's 3 games in 11 days for 4 of the top 7 teams, and they're just going to beat up on each other, and that includes the Texans, who are going to be playing this weekend up against the Chiefs on Saturday. Then in 4 days, the Texans then have to go face the Ravens. Well, then the Chiefs, they play the Texans, and then they have to play the Steelers, who play the Ravens Saturday. That's a mini tournament, 2 games in 5 days, 3 games in 11 days. And then you also add in that the Chargers and Broncos played on Sunday, and both those teams are now playing on Thursday. That's 2 games in 5 days for them too. They're both playoff teams. So 6 of the top 7 teams in the AFC have this crazy late December, we're going to beat you up, you're going to beat us up. And the Buffalo Bills are sitting back in Buffalo with a Cohiba playing against the Jets and the Patriots the next 3 weeks. The Bills have the smoothest ride to the playoffs. The Bills do not have to go 100%. The Bills do not necessarily have to play their starters, and they can just watch as the carnage piles up from all these other teams, and they have to manage their rosters and somehow get through the wreckage of what these next few weeks are. I think it's fascinating. These Christmas Day games threw such a wrench in the plans, and the NFL, credit to them, knew that these 4 teams would matter. I don't know if they realized the Chargers and the Broncos would matter too, but now you've got this mini playoff at the late end of the season, and the Bills don't have to deal with any of it. They just sit and watch. So they have a great advantage here.
Which we're just setting ourselves up for Aaron Rodgers to do something MVP
The ultimate
the Bills.
Ultimate trap game, right? Like next week, Bills Jets. All the Bills have to do is keep winning, and like after the Chiefs go down, and like Rodgers spoils it.
As soon as you say all that, that's the type of stuff that happens. Let's start chronologically, because reading your column, I was fascinated by your tidbit about Sean Payton, who is Bill Parcells 2.0. Oh. Like and look, I love him to death. I respect the hell out of him, but he is a paranoid, always looking for an edge sort of coach. So the fact that you said the NFL approached him about waiving the you don't have to play 2 road Thursday games in a season, because they already did it in New Orleans way back in October. They approached him about it, and Sean Payton, of all people, said, sure, let's do it. Let's play on short rest in December. Can you explain this to me?
Sean Payton said, F it, we'll play them anywhere, anytime, any place. That's what he basically said. There's a rule when they did this Amazon flexing, and everyone thought, well, Amazon will never actually flex any of their games. They need a month advance. And they also have to have in the stipulations that no team ever has to play 2 road Thursday night games. Well, Browns Bengals is on the schedule. That's a dog of a game right now. No one wants to watch that. Amazon put the ask in, can we flex out? Can you give us something? The league goes to Amazon and says, it's unlikely. The only game we can really do here because of the Saturday stuff and all the other games is Broncos versus Chargers, but unfortunately the Broncos already played on the road, so it's not going to happen. They go to Sean Payton, who I'm sure talked with George Payton, their GM, no relation, and their owners, and said, hey, look, Sean Payton said, put us on Thursday night, put us in prime time, Let us do it in front of a national audience. We'll go to LA and then we'll get a long break to finish up the season in our final 2 weeks.
That's
We
the
get
part.
a nice long 10-day break, and they have a little bit of a cushion here. They have a 1-game lead over the Chargers, and they also beat the Colts, so there's no tiebreaker there. And the Dolphins lost last week, so they actually played it perfectly. Even if they lose on Thursday night, that puts them at 9-6. They're most likely still going to the playoffs. And that is what they wanted. They wanted a 2 weeks like sprint at the end, and Sean Payton might have played this masterfully. Now, if Kansas City somehow needs to play to win and maintain that number 1 seed in week 18, that totally changes the plan because that's who the Broncos play in week 18. And I think they were assuming that they would play the Chiefs backups and Carson Wentz when they agreed to this. But it is fascinating. He said, "Thank you for that nice rule, NFL. We are okay with bypassing it. We'll play anyone anywhere. Let's go to LA." Where, by the way, a nice third wrinkle or fourth wrinkle on the Sean Payton thing. When he was entering his free agency as a coach, the Chargers, which he lived in Manhattan Beach at the time, said, "We're good with Brandon Staley. We're not firing Brandon Staley. We're going to stick with Brandon Staley instead of meeting with Sean Payton." I wonder if that plays a role too.
That's Sean Payton wrapped up in a neat little package, like chance to get revenge and stick it to somebody. Also, and you get to play under the bright lights, but I think that the rest part is so big here. Like when you think you play this game and if you win, the Broncos lock up their wild card if they win this game. So, if you win, you then go into a long weekend with your playoff spot secure, and depending on how things play out, the Chiefs game might not mean anything. Like you might get 2 opportunities to rest right before the playoffs. If you're not the Chiefs or the Bills and you don't have a shot at the 1 seed, manufacturing late season rest like this, it's borderline genius. I'm very impressed by this move from Sean Payton.
Now, if they come out there and they lose 42-0 and
Not great.
then the Chargers, I mean, the truth of the matter is the Chargers and the Broncos are very likely to go to the playoffs, and they're going to be the 6 and the 7 seeds. So does it matter if you're the 6 seed or the 7 seed? Well, it's likely the difference is between playing the Texans or the Ravens or the Steelers, I guess. But like, I don't know, maybe resting and having the ability to play the Texans on a rest is, but I don't know. We'll see.
For me, it's not so much about like dodging opponents as just getting guys off of their feet right before the playoffs
Well,
start.
what's the gap? Like, say the 2 seed is the Bills,
Yeah.
and the 3 seed, let's say, is the Steelers.
Okay.
I think you'd much
That
rather
feels
play
likely.
the Steelers than the Bills,
Yes.
right?
No,
Yeah.
that's for sure. Yeah.
Yes. So it
That's
does matter.
I'm I'm like I said, it goes so deep with Sean Payton. And on top of that, I'll just throw out too, the Broncos will be well represented at SoFi too. Like it's a huge national fan base,
No doubt.
against the Chargers, who often don't have
Dude,
robust
Chargers really
support.
disappointed me last week. They're home against the Buccaneers, #1 defense, a win. They could still, and like, they gave up 500 yards of offense, and the Bucs didn't punt. Like that's a brutal showing. They haven't beaten anyone this year. They beat the Broncos, but Pat Surtain was out. They have not beaten anybody this year. So like, I'd like for the Chargers going into the playoffs to get a win that matters. It would be nice.
Yeah, I thought the Bucks might win that game, but the way they won it was surprising to me. I would agree
I
with
picked
that.
I picked the Bucks also on Fox on Sunday, but I did it because I was trying to be wild and like I didn't really think they were, but they did. They killed them.
Now you're like, oh, okay, Tampa, let's
smart.
go.
Yeah, hello. Yeah.
We've touched on the Chiefs, but I mean, okay, full focus. Saturday, early window, NBC, Texans go to Arrowhead. Patrick Mahomes, I feel like there's already not any drama with this. You know, we squeezed what we could out of like
What do you
36
think?
hours. He's a full participant on Tuesday. Of course, this guy's going to play. You cannot convince me Patrick Mahomes is going to sit out of a game. So rather than try to debate whether he will, because I think he will, should he? And I don't, is that a hot take for me to wonder if he should play this game when you consider the Chiefs have a lead? It's not a huge lead, but they do have a lead. They have Carson Wentz, who has played a lot of football. They still have Steve Spagnuolo's defense. Like, they can win a home game against a team that hasn't had its offense figured out in 2 months without Patrick Mahomes. At least I think they can. And I think I'd rather have Patrick Mahomes really rested and ready to go on Christmas against Pittsburgh than subject himself to 10 more hits and 2 more sacks. By the way, it's a huge week for that to matter. In case anybody was curious, Danielle Hunter's second in the league in sacks.
Oh, yeah.
And Will Anderson's not far behind him either. Like, this is a team that can take advantage of your problems on the offensive line. I know Pittsburgh can too, but for me, it's all about getting Mahomes as much rest as possible.
The sick part of me immediately thought of the business implications of Mahomes not playing on Netflix Christmas after they paid $1 billion for the game.
Wouldn't
And then
be a
you
good
get
look.
And you get Carson Wentz coming out there, a very Carson Wentz Christmas. And you get to sit down with Mina Kimes and Carson Wentz about his redemption story. It just doesn't hit. It just
No.
doesn't hit.
It's not the same.
You'll have Mahomes on Christmas. The question is this week. I don't know. As of right now, they need to win 2 of the next 3. They cannot risk it unless the Patriots somehow upset Buffalo. If the Patriots upset Buffalo, then you might see Mahomes resting on Christmas and week 18. But gosh, I don't think they can risk it. And I think you will see Mahomes Sunday. If he can go, they're gonna go. Like, that's him. He's a gamer.
See,
And he was a full participant on Tuesday. So like, I think he's gonna play.
It feels like a moot point to me. Like, I think he's going to play. And Hollywood Brown was a full participant too, so maybe
I
the
could
Chiefs
see them
offense,
rolling out Wentz this week. I know he's gonna play Christmas.
I think he plays both because he's just that competitive.
Yeah.
I need to see it to believe that he would sit out of a game that he could go in. But if it were me, I'd say,
Short
hey,
week. Short week makes it a little.
this is the benefit of being 13-1, Pat. Let's get that thing on ice for a few more days. Let's not have Danielle Hunter ripping around left tackle 12 times. I know Joe Tooney played incredible against Miles
Played
Garrett,
very
by the
well.
way.
He did.
was great.
And Garrett left the game for quite a bit, so that was one of the reasons. But like, Mahomes was under duress a lot in
No,
that
that's
game. Like,
Joe Tooney played great, and Mahomes still got hit 13
Yeah.
times. So it makes me nervous. That's all, Peter.
I hear you.
If you putting the optics of the Christmas game aside, like if he could only play one of these games, would you prefer it to be Steelers or Texans?
Steelers, give me as much time off
Yeah.
that ankle.
That's
Give me
my
the
thought as
14
well.
days. Yeah. Or whatever it is, 10 days. Gosh, it's weird. They play Saturday and Wednesday. It's so weird.
It's the one drawback of being the most dominant team in the NFL is they're going to find a way to
And
put you
Black
on.
Friday
They're
and
going to
Monday
find
Night
a way to
Football.
put you on in
No.
prime time. They're
know.
just that's what's going to happen. Let's wrap this up. We've mentioned the Steelers too. We'll just continue our trip through this mini tournament. Steelers at Ravens, the return game. I wanted to mention this to you because we typically have a good back and forth about this. Ravens Steelers on Fox.
Yeah.
It's the Tom Brady game, which it's going to be great, but that's not something I'm used to saying. It's a whole new
No.
world.
No, and it's a rare W from the schedule makers for Fox this year. I feel like they were supposed to get this awesome Niners versus Chiefs game, and there were too many injuries with the Niners, and it ended up being not the game we were hoping it was going to be. This is a beauty. This is a lone window. Tom Brady on the call in Baltimore. Steelers have won 8 of 9. You got great personalities in Tomlin and Harbaugh. And I watched Marlon Humphrey's media session yesterday, and he's not the star player he might have been a couple years ago, but he's still the voice in a lot of ways of that team when he talks. And you could tell this one matters. And it's not just because of the playoff seeding. It's like they need to beat Pittsburgh. This can't go on. It's not a rivalry right now. The Steelers have dominated the Ravens the last 4 seasons. And I think a lot of those veteran players, Lamar included, have had just enough. And I think with Brady in the house, it does matter. It's kind of cool for Lamar Jackson to have a game called by Tom Brady, which is not common. I want to say he did Cowboys Ravens earlier this season,
did,
right?
yeah,
Like he
in
was on that
September.
one, but it's not common. It's an AFC team. I like the Ravens in this one, and I might rue the day of saying that. I just feel like this is one where coming off 5 touchdowns last week and feeling themselves a little bit, Baltimore keeps it rolling.
That's the frustrating thing about this series for everybody but Pittsburgh fans is every time they play on paper, I'm just like, the Ravens should win this game. Like they're 6-point favorites at home. But I say that every time they play, and Lamar Jackson is 1-4 as a starter against the Steelers. Like the Steelers just find the dumbest ways to win this game. It just happened a few weeks ago, 18-16.
Remember
Last
the Peyton
year,
Wilson interception on the sideline, and Justice Hill had it in his hands. It was unbelievable.
the one last year will stick with me forever. The way, like, the Ravens were just in control for 57 and a half minutes, and then Pittsburgh wins 17-10, just like the dumbest results possible. So I can't rule this out. I'll just say, without George Pickens, I cannot be scared of this Pittsburgh offense. No. I don't know how they're supposed to find the explosive plays without George Pickens.
No, I'm with you. But they find ways, and Boswell makes kicks and Tucker misses them.
It's true. It's true. I was thinking about that while I was prepping. I was like, we haven't talked about Justin Tucker in a week or in a few weeks. And then I thought about it and I was like, well, they had a bye and then they didn't need to kick field goals against the Giants. So
they showed him last week and he looked disheveled and confused. And I'm like, let's rely on Lamar's 5 touchdowns instead.
This is going to be a week where Boswell and Tucker have to earn their money. If I had to guess, it should be fantastic. I mean, you know what to expect.
It's gonna, the Ravens. Deal. It's 2017, and it'll be 2 minutes left, and the Steelers will have the ball, and it's do they win or they lose? That's basically it.
It's going to be a fantastic Saturday, and don't sleep on Thursday either. Like, the Broncos can clinch that playoff spot. Chargers can't clinch with a win, but with a win and a couple favorable results, they can also secure their playoff spot this weekend. It's going to be fantastic. Looking forward to it, man. Always appreciate talking with you.
You're the man, dude. Thank you.
Talked a lot about Thursday and Saturday games with Peter Schrager, but the best game of Sunday in Week 16, for my money anyway, is happening right here on Fox. Philadelphia Eagles heading down I-95 to face the Washington Commanders in the return game of their rivalry. They played the first one back in November. Eagles got the win in that one. This one with some big stakes. The Eagles can clinch the NFC East with a win on the road. Washington can darn near lock up a playoff spot. If they get a win and maybe a couple other favorable results, they can guarantee themselves at least a playoff berth. It's a big one. There's a lot on the line, and to talk about it, I am joined now by Fox Sports reporter Ralph Vacchiano. Ralph, how we doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm trying my best to get in the festive spirit, the Christmas spirit, and I think an outdoor game at FedEx Field with high stakes, some chilly weather, I think that's just what I need to sort of get in the holiday spirit here a week before Christmas.
Maybe a little snow. If they add that to the mix, maybe then you can really get into the holiday spirit.
I feel like I bring this up with you whenever we talk about the Commanders. I'm not sick of it though. I refuse to be jaded by a team being good for the first time literally in multiple generations. And I looked this up, Ralph. I think this has been out there for a week, but I think it bears repeating. This is the Commanders' best record this early in the season since 1992. And if you want to take it one step further, they've had a 10-win season a few times in the last 30 years. They haven't done better than 10 wins since the 91 season when they won Super Bowl 26. So they can't get to 11 wins this weekend, but continuing to stack results, man, like this is unprecedented. It has been 33 years since the Commanders were this good. And I don't think we should lose sight of that fact.
No, it's a reminder of how important it is that their franchise has been revived and really what their fans went through for decades. They're certainly not the only fan base that has suffered through that. You could look at Cleveland, you could look at Detroit, and the Jets is a great example. There's plenty of them, but it's just really meaningful when they're finally actually good again. And, obviously you hope it's sustainable, but even this one season for them is so important to the fans there who have just really been through it. And they certainly had a golden era. Back in the Redskins days, back in the Joe Theismann days and Mark Rippon days, they were Joe Gibbs, a great franchise. But it's been a very, very long time since that was the case. And I think that, it just does make this franchise, this season for this franchise a lot more special.
Now that we've said all these very nice things about the Commanders, I can't help but notice The closest thing resembling a good win on this resume happened all the way back in week 4. That would be the road win against Arizona. It's been, and to be fair to them, they played the Ravens close. They played the Steelers close. They played the Eagles close for about 3/4 the last time this game happened. But it would go a long way toward earning some legitimacy if they were able to get this win at home. Not just because it puts them that much closer to the playoffs, but it would be easily the marquee win of this season under Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, let's not try to spoil what they're enjoying down there right before the holidays. Let them have their fun. I think we did discuss this on this podcast a few weeks earlier that, they have built a little bit of a house of cards and that their schedule wasn't all that tough. But, you only play who they tell you to play, and they were beating those teams, and their record is what it is for a reason. All of it matters. The fact that they are not beating the better teams matters when you think of them as, are they a Super Bowl contender or just a playoff contender? They're probably just a playoff contender, which for the first year in Jaden Daniels and Dan Quinn's career there, that's probably enough. Get to the playoffs, take your chances and see what happens. But they are sort of missing that signature win, and this could be that. They're not playing their best football the last few weeks. It would be a monumental step up to beat an Eagles team that is absolutely rolling. It would say a lot about where this team is heading towards the postseason. Nothing that they've done so far is really anything even close to what it would mean to beating Philadelphia on Sunday. So that would make a statement that maybe they're a lot more ready than most of us think they are.
So let's jump into the nuts and bolts of this actual game. As you and I are recording this, Saquon Barkley did not participate in the open portion of the Eagles Wednesday practice. That's not overly alarming for me. He's a longtime veteran. It's very normal to see guys, especially at this stage of the season, sit out on Wednesday, even Thursday. I'm not really doubting that Saquon plays, but my question for you is, with this little time left to the postseason, I can't help but notice, Kenny Gainwell, he was great against the Steelers the other day in relief. He's only taken 10 or more carries in 6 of his career games with the Eagles. Will Shipley, the third string running back, has largely been a garbage time player for the Eagles this year. With Saquon taking as much of a workload as he has this season, do you think it would be a good idea to turn this into more of a timeshare, at least in these weeks leading up to the playoffs?
It's certainly not a dumb idea to do that. And if you think about Saquon Barkley, one of the reasons that he didn't get his big contract from the Giants and people doubted whether he would be worth it, it wasn't just the argument about our running backs worth it. It was about him and his injury history and how many games he had to miss over the years. A great story of this season for him and the Eagles is how healthy he's been and how he's been able to fight through whatever nagging injuries he's had. He got hit on the knee in the last game and he was able to come back in. But, look, you could put him out there for 3 plays and he could take a hit the wrong way. And that could be just the wrong play that he's in for. So I don't know if you can completely prevent him from getting hurt, but you do wonder, is he going to wear down? He's certainly never had to endure a long playoff run. Can he sustain this all the way through to the Super Bowl? It's a tough call for the Eagles because they are still battling for home field. And, it's not only the first seed up for grabs, it's the second and third that they got to worry about as long as the Lions and Vikings are still hanging on to the same record. So, they obviously are going to want to keep playing as hard as they can. But if there are ways to sneak in Kenneth Gainwell just a little bit, take a little bit of the workload off, I think they'd have to consider it.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I'm not advocating that they shut Saquon down. If you're a fantasy football player, don't get mad at me. I'm not asking Saquon to sit out of these games, but he's taken 80% of the carries for the Eagles, and understandably so. He's an incredible player, but if he's got an injured knee and you've already got 12 wins, I know you're gunning for the number 1 seed, but maybe you dial that down from 80% of the carries to 60, 65 and try to at least limit the wear and tear that he's taking here when you've already got a playoff spot secured.
Yeah, it's not a dumb idea at all. And there are other ways to do it too. You can, give him less of a workload in the game, not just putting Kenneth Gainwell in there, but, pass a little bit more. They showed they can finally do that in the last game. And I know Nick Sirianni says, well, they could have done it all along, and maybe that's true, but they finally leaned a little bit more on their passing game. That's something they certainly could try to do against the Washington Commanders. The problem is, of course, if you get up a little bit, well, then you've got to run the ball to kind of do what they do and bully teams towards the end of a game. But there are ways that they can limit the wear and tear on him and just make sure he's fresh, because I think anybody in that organization would say, as much as they want the number one seed and that week of rest would be great, the much more important thing for them is a healthy Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts, everybody, all their stars healthy for the playoffs. And Saquon Barkley is the one guy where he's not tested in that area, and he's got a history of those injuries. So you might want to think about what you can do to make sure he stays fresh.
Speaking of the Eagles potentially throwing the ball a little bit more, this is a fun cornerback game, a fun matchup game, because we'll get a good look at Marshawn Lattimore for the first time. I'll be honest with you, Ralph, until I started prepping, I had kind of forgotten Lattimore was a Commander. He finally played last week against New Orleans, and the reason I didn't realize that is because the Saints didn't even look his way. The big revenge spot in the Superdome, he goes back to New Orleans. The backup quarterbacks for the Saints did not target a Marshawn Lattimore receiver one time. I have a feeling that's going to change against Philadelphia. I'm very curious to see how the Commanders' pass defense might hold up with him in there, obviously going against a matchup as tough as A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially tough because there's two of them, right? And both of them could be number one receivers. You got to figure out, who you want your number one cornerback to cover. It's not the easiest thing to do. And the Eagles are just so expert, and Kellen Moore has been fantastic with this, of getting these guys open in position to make plays. And, maybe it's a little easy because they do have A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. They've also got tight ends they can throw to, and Saquon Barkley they can throw to. There's so many weapons that you have to worry about that it's, there's always seems to be an open receiver somewhere in the field, especially when Jalen Hurts gets out of the pocket and starts to create things on his own. So, the Commanders don't have the cornerback depth overall, I think, to contain that. It's one of the reasons why they went out and got Marshawn Lattimore. So at least maybe they could shut down one receiver in a game against a top team. But when you've got one with two and more weapons, it just gets really tough for them to do.
I saw a soundbite making the waves, making the rounds this week ahead of this game was Commanders running back Brian Robinson Jr. He said on the radio he thinks Washington's the better team, which I don't hold that against him. I mean, that's how you're supposed to feel. You're a pro football player. But I thought it was interesting. He said in the last game, he thought they made too many self-inflicted mistakes. My main memory of the last game between these two teams is the Washington offense just couldn't stay on the field. They could not sustain drives. Terry McLaurin had one catch for 10 yards. The running game wasn't as potent as it usually is. Is there a key? And if there is, what is it for the Commanders having a little bit more efficiency in this second go around?
Well, I think it's Jaden Daniels, and he's, look, the last two games have not been his best or the team's best, but since that first Eagles game, he has gotten much better. He's developed a really strong connection with Terry McLaurin. He's clicked with Zach Ertz. He's clicked with, all of his weapons. They're a more diverse offense, and I think that they trust the quarterback even more than they did early in the season. So they could use him to sustain those drives. The Eagles are so good on defense, it's not easy. They do really a terrific job of stuffing the run, which is going to be the Commanders' bread and butter. They don't leave a lot open with their secondary. They get a decent pass rush. It's not as good as it was a couple of years ago, but it's still good enough. They just are not as vulnerable as they have been in the past, and the Commanders have to find a way, maybe using some of Jaden Daniels' ability to get outside the pocket and create things and create open space for his receivers to just stay on the field and keep the Eagles offense off of it as much as possible. Because as we saw in the last game, when the Eagles offense is on the field, sometimes they don't get off. They could stay on for a really, really long time, and that could just devastate an opposing team, especially one like the Commanders. When they're out there, they got to take advantage of every opportunity they can.
Yeah, between these two offenses, maybe this will be an hour and 30-minute football game. Maybe we'll just have about half a dozen 20-play possessions. It should be a good one either way. Early window Fox. Before I let you go, I do want to touch on another big game in the NFC East on Sunday. That's the night game. The Buccaneers going to visit the Cowboys. And I do say it's a big game because, look, the Bucs have the 1-game lead. I know there's turmoil in Atlanta with Kirk Cousins getting benched. We talked about that with Peter Schrager earlier. Even with all that said, the Buccaneers cannot afford a let up by virtue of the fact that they don't have a tiebreaker over Atlanta. And I can't believe I'm saying this, Ralph, but the Cowboys have been pretty pesky for the last month. I mean, I don't think Tampa can get away with just chalking this up as a win ahead of time.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And I know their offense has been rolling, and I don't see them putting up 40-something points on the Cowboys and just running away with them. I think the Cowboys have really tightened a lot of things up, and they've impressed me offensively, which I didn't think they'd be able to do with Dak Prescott out, in large part because they are relying on their running game in a way that they never did early in the season. Rico Dowdle is running so hard, and so he didn't get as many chances early in the season, but he's running better than he did. They're trusting him more, and that's actually allowing Cooper Rush to have more opportunities in the passing game where he actually does have some weapons. They can stay on the field and sustain some drives, which is what you need to do against a team like the Bucs so they don't run up 40, 45 points on you. It's definitely the trap type of game where, the Bucs know what they're playing for. They think they're on a roll and they're getting an opponent that they should be thinking of as inferior. But you got to be careful right now with the Cowboys because they're not playing like the team we saw when their season was going to hell. They're playing like a team that thinks they're still alive, even though they actually aren't.
Rico Dowdle not being the unquestioned lead back from week 1 still will forever mystify me. But you raise the main talking point because, look, I think this is pretty straightforward. The Bucs are 4-point road favorites. I think they should win if they play their best game. What I'm curious about is the big picture here with this, because you just laid it out perfectly, Ralph. Mike McCarthy has the Cowboys playing surprisingly good football. He's gone 3-3 since Dak Prescott got hurt. You could argue the Cowboys should be 4-0 over the last month because it was a horribly botched blocked punt in that game against Cincinnati that cost them that game. Are we starting to imagine a world where the Cowboys could finish well enough to bring Mike McCarthy back? I mean, the schedule unfortunately works against him. It's Tampa, Philly, and Washington to close this thing out. So there are no more easy games left on the schedule. But the way they've been playing, you get to 7-10 or even 8-9. I'm starting to believe that maybe Mike McCarthy's not done in Dallas.
Look, I mean, you can't discount the fact that the last 3 years he went 12-5 in each of them, got them to the playoffs. I understand that it didn't go the way they wanted in the postseason, but they still got there and they still had a terrific record, and that matters. And you get to this year, and yeah, it didn't start as well, but then injuries mounted. A lot of things went wrong in this season, and he still has them playing hard and still has them playing well. And that should matter for something because it makes you think that if they can play like this, they've rediscovered that running game, and Mike McCarthy has them believing, and they're believing in him. Imagine what he can do when he gets a full team back. Maybe if they add a few players in the offseason. It makes you think certainly that coaching is not their problem. And add in the fact that Jerry Jones at every turn is praising Mike McCarthy and the job that he's done. Yeah, it does make me think that the odds are starting to shift in his favor, that he'll be back next season. And I think that his players would like that. And maybe the fans won't, but boy, again, 3 years of 12-5 football and a playoff berth, most organizations would take that. I'd want to give him another run.
My beef is not with Mike McCarthy, honestly, and I admire the way the Cowboys have responded to him. What you just said, though, I think is what most Cowboy fans would point out, that they were in trouble before they started losing important players to injury because they didn't do the work to put themselves in a good situation before the season. And I want to make sure people are keeping mind of the fact that injuries are not what doomed this team. Like, they made a bad situation worse, but this was a struggling team before all this stuff started happening. And regardless of whether you bring Mike McCarthy back or not, the Cowboys just simply have to try harder to put a winner on the field in 2025, no matter who their coach is.
I put most of that, honestly, on the offseason losses. They just lost too many people and too many key players. and didn't bring in enough help. And should Mike McCarthy have gotten them off to a better start with what he had? Yeah, of course. But does that erase all that he did the previous 3 seasons and what he's done towards the end of this season? No. I want to tell the GM or whoever is in charge, even and maybe it's Mike McCarthy as a voice in it too. I'd want to tell them all, get some help in the offseason, spend some cap space to keep your players, and then see what you can build. And I think he was dealt a bad hand, did not play it well, and that certainly goes against him. But there's a lot of other things that stand out in his favor.
I'm so curious to see how this goes. And obviously, the Bucs are playing for the playoffs. The Cowboys are mathematically alive, but it's like less than 1% chance. But it's been riveting watching the Cowboys, thinking every bounce of the ball, every good play, every bad play could decide, or at least help decide, who the next coach in Dallas is, whether Mike gets a contract extension. So even without the playoff stakes, I'm back on the bandwagon and excited to watch Cowboys football, which I did not think that would be the case at the end of October. So we'll take the wins where we can get them. Ralph, I always love catching up with you, man. I'll talk to you soon. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave. Have a good holiday.
You too. One more really big matchup we wanted to focus on in this preview episode, and that would be in the late window right here on Fox. The Minnesota Vikings traveling up to Seattle to take on the Seahawks. It's a big road spot for Minnesota. Felt like the perfect candidate for on the road, presented by Honda. Dreams are unstoppable. So much to dial in on in this game. And you have to start with the injury we saw on Sunday night. Geno Smith hurt his knee in the second half of that brutal loss to the Packers. Felt especially bad. It's a bad loss regardless, but when you watch how the offense looked with Sam Howell, you're wondering if the Seahawks even need to play the rest of their season. But in the latest edition of Football Players Being Aliens, Geno Smith was a full participant on Wednesday at the beginning of the practice week. Keep an eye on it. We won't know for sure for a few more days, but general rule of thumb, if the starting quarterback can go fully on Wednesday, he's going to play on Sunday. And that changes the math completely for Seattle. I would have no problem sitting here saying they don't have a chance without Geno Smith. That's how much he's meant to their offense this year. With him in, they can at least give it a spirited effort. And the Seahawks need it, man. They are already tied with the Rams on record. They lost the NFC West lead to LA last weekend. They can't really afford a loss here. They lost the first matchup against LA, so they're down on tiebreakers right now. They do get to play them again at the end of the season, but if you lose these next two before then, it's irrelevant. Their playoff probability drops as low as 24% if they lose this game, according to NFL.com. So big spot for the Seahawks to try to rebound after losing to Green Bay. And yet, I wonder, okay, so the Vikings don't have as much to play for as Seattle by virtue of the fact that Minnesota is in the field already. By the way, Vikings fans, thank your neighborhood Seahawk fan for helping you into the playoffs by losing to Green Bay. I digress. I wonder if the Vikings have more motivation because you're not as banged up. You're not in as dire a spot. If anything, you should feel the adrenaline and the juice of chasing after the number one seed in the NFC. We talked about it earlier this week. Nobody talks about Minnesota as a team that could earn the bye week, but they absolutely could. They are neck and neck with a banged up Detroit team. They're even on record. They did lose by the skin of their teeth to the Lions earlier this season, but if they win out, they get the bye week and the NFC North title. Of course, winning out is going to be a lot easier said than done. You could argue this game at Seattle is their easiest remaining game. It's at Seahawks, home against Green Bay, at Detroit. If they go 3-0, they're going to have earned it. But I just want to make sure we are talking about the Vikings with the proper context, which is this is not a plucky underdog that is winning games by the skin of their teeth. And they should not just be happy to be the 5 seed in the NFC playoffs, because if they play their cards right, play up to their potential for 3 more weeks, they could get a week off. I don't think enough people are talking about the Vikings in that frame of mind. If there's one matchup I'm watching in this game, I just think the Vikings have the advantage on the front on both sides of the ball, but particularly their defense against Seattle's offense. Seattle's offensive line has been an issue all season long in good health and in bad health. It hasn't been great. That's why Geno's season is so remarkable, because he's making it work despite that. Seahawks have 3 offensive linemen in the top 25 for sacks allowed across the course of the season. Only other teams with 3 linemen that have allowed that many sacks: the Chargers, which Justin Herbert has been getting beat to hell for the second half of the season, and the Tennessee Titans. No need to say a whole lot more about that. Vikings pressure the quarterback as well as almost anyone in the league, top 10 in pressure percentage. They blitz their ass off, as we all know, 40% on the season. 42 sacks on the year is 4th in the league. And as long as I'm shouting out Viking stuff that's not getting enough love, Jonathan Grenard is one of the key free agency pickups of the season. It's very funny. The Vikings let Danielle Hunter go to Houston from Minnesota, and he's having a hell of a year. The Texans let Jonathan Grenard go from Houston to Minnesota, and he's also having a hell of a year. Everybody's happy. Grenard's got 11 sacks, tied for 4th most in the NFL. He's got 4 forced fumbles. He's got 66 pressures, according to Pro Football Focus, which is tied for 3rd most in the league. There are only 7 players in the NFL with 60 or more pressures per PFF. So Jonathan Grenard is keeping company this season with Myles Garrett, Trey Hendrickson, Chris Jones, Zach Allen, Micah Parsons. Shout out Rams rookie Jared Verse, by the way, who's also in that club as a rookie. That's remarkable in its own right. But we're talking about Jonathan Grenard and the Vikings right now. He has been phenomenal. He's played at an all-pro level. He's probably going to be a major pain for the Seahawks offensive line on Sunday. Vikings also have Andrew Van Ginkel, Patrick Jones. They get a boatload of pressure from their DBs. Ivan Pace Jr. and Blake Cashman, the linebackers, get a lot of pressure because Brian Flores likes to blitz. I'm going to guess it's going to be coming at Geno Smith from all angles, from down linemen as well as DBs and linebackers. I think Brian Flores is going to make Geno Smith hang in the pocket and beat him time after time with amazing throws. The fun part is that Geno Smith can do that. He's incredible when he's on and clicking, and he's going to need to be. I think if Geno Smith plays one of the games of his season, I think the Seahawks can win this game. If he's merely good, I just think the Vikings have too much firepower. I like Minnesota to get it done, but I can't wait to see Geno Smith try to deal with this Brian Flores pass rush. Time now for the Super Six presented by DraftKings. If you're not familiar with the Super Six, what are we doing? It's a week before Christmas. We've been doing this all season. If you listen to the show, it's time to play. If you haven't, head over to foxsports.com or the Fox Sports app, find the Super Six, pick 6 bets, follow along with all the action on Sunday. It's a ton of fun. There's 6 categories. You make 6 different bets. Who's going to score the most points? Who's going to have the most yards? Who's going to score the most touchdowns? You get my drift. You make 6 picks. If you hit them all, you can win big. It's such a fun way to be invested in all of the action. And let's be honest, a lot of teams that aren't playing for much at this point in the season, it gives you a reason to be invested in a little bit of everything. And when I saw the prompts this week, I laughed out loud because I shamelessly knew which one I was going to go with to try to help you start your bets. It was tailor-made for me, I think. Thank you, Super Six people, because the prompt this week is which LSU alum will have the most receiving yards. As an LSU alum, as a shameless, obnoxious LSU alum, this was the only category I had any interest in doing because we are wide receiver U, and we do have 4 different receivers who could hit big in this prompt because your choices: Jamar Chase going against the Cleveland Browns, Justin Jefferson going against Seattle, Malik Neighbors going against Atlanta, and Brian Thomas Jr. going against the Las Vegas Raiders. That's how good LSU is at producing wide receivers. Goodness gracious. I'm going to go with Jamar Chase. I don't love any of these options. I think they're all tough for various reasons. Giants. How do you love the quarterback play with the Giants? I can't pick Malik Neighbors. Even though Brian Thomas Jr. went off last week, I don't really trust the quarterback play with Jacksonville either. So it's a pick between my 2 2019 guys, Justin and Jamar. Minnesota spreads the ball around so well. Justin Jefferson has only been targeted more than 9 times twice this year. Justin Jefferson only has one 100-yard game in his last 6, and he's only gone over 81 yards twice in that span. It's not to say he's having a bad year. He's been great. But Sam Darnold knows how to get Jordan Addison involved and Aaron Jones and TJ Hawkinson. One thing about Joe Burrow is, at least in the second half of the season, he's going to target Jamar Chase. First time Jamar Chase played Cleveland, he was only targeted 6 times. He was averaging 7 targets per game at that point in the season. Since then, he is averaging 13 targets per game. He's been targeted double-digit times 7 times on the season. Joe Burrow, much like me, is shameless about finding his LSU receiver. So I'm just going to trust that. I'm going to trust that Joe Burrow is going to throw the ball to Jamar 10, 12, 13 times, and he's going to finish with the most receiving yards. But no matter who actually hits, LSU wins, and that's what this is really all about. Now it's time for the NFL on Fox Pod Prop. But first, do you have a gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas. 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in New Hampshire, Oregon, and Ontario. Bet must win to receive reward. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see sportsbook.draftkings.com/ftball. DraftKings Sportsbook is the #1 place to bet touchdowns this season. And this week, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Download the app and use promo code GAMETIME. That's code GAMETIME when you sign up. DraftKings Sportsbook, the crown is yours. And for my anytime touchdown prop, I'm going to go with Detroit Lions wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown, who goes against the Chicago Bears on Sunday. Chicago, how the mighty have fallen, or at least how the very good have fallen. The Bears arguably had the league's best secondary in the first half of the season. And upon looking at it, maybe that's because the Bears only played 3 teams that are currently at or above 500 during the first half of the season. Because in the back half, when all the division games started happening, it ain't been so great. They've played 5 teams at or above 500 since then. They are 26th in the league in the second half of the season in EPA per dropback. They're allowing 246 passing yards per game. They've been getting diced up the vast majority of the games they've played over the back half. They allowed a league lowest 5 passing touchdowns in the first 8 weeks of the season. And the last of those was that Hail Mary by Noah Brown. So a little bit of a fluky play. Like, they were not allowing passing touchdowns. They've allowed almost twice as many in the second half. 9 passing touchdowns from week 9 to 15. Sam Darnold hit him for 2. Jared Goff hit him for 2. Brock Purdy hit him for 2. So the passing touchdowns are happening. And who better to benefit than Amon-Ra? He's got 10 touchdowns in 14 games. He had a streak of 8 straight from September 22nd to November 17th. And what gives me even more confidence, he went 3 straight games without a touchdown before scoring in that crazy game against Buffalo last week. So he's not going to go back to 0. It sounds like a gambler's fallacy, honestly, but I'm going to ride with it. Amon-Ra has been a lock to score way more often than not. I think he does it again against a Bears team that really feels like it's circling the drain. I like it. I like it. I know that the conditions in Chicago probably won't be great, but Amon-Ra is a quarterback-friendly receiver, and he will find his way into the end zone in Week 16. One last thing to get to before we wrap the show. As always, it's our hurry-up offense. There's 16 matchups in the league. We do our best to talk about all of the biggest ones, the juicy ones, the ones with the best storylines. We take a deep dive, get you ready for the weekend, but especially as we get this close to the end of the year, that they're not all winners. They're not all interesting, scintillating matchups. A lot of games, 8 to be exact, 8 other games to get to that are either between two bad teams or a good team and a bad team, just not quite as interesting. But this is the NFL on Fox podcast. We leave no stone unturned. We are going to talk in some form or fashion about every single game, even if it's just briefly. So that's the goal here. My producers have given me 2 minutes on the clock. I'm going to do my best. I can't make promises in week 16, but I'm going to do my best to give you something interesting about these other 8 games on the schedule. Let's start at the end of the weekend. Monday Night Football, Saints playing the Packers at Lambeau Field. It's easy to clown on Jordan Love when he throws a pick every week, but keep that same energy. In the last month, 7 touchdown passes, no interceptions for Jordan Love. The Saints have forced just 2 takeaways in their 5 games under Darren Rizzi. That feels important. Patriots at Bills. Buffalo can set NFL history here. 30-plus points for a 9th straight game. Nobody else in league history has scored 30-plus more times in a row than that. The Pats have allowed 30 or more points in 5 of their games, so it's very doable for the Bills to set history. Giants at Falcons, all I want to say is that Michael Penix Jr. was shopping at Costco when he got the call that he'd be starting. I'm a fan already. Can't wait to see him play. Rams at Jets. Very funny that to stay on top of the NFC West, Matthew Stafford has to go play his old adversary, Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers is 13-4 against Stafford, although they've only played one time since Stafford left Detroit. Packers did win that game, though. Packers did beat the Rams in 2021. Cardinals at Panthers. Love this stat. The Small Kings Bowl, the 3rd matchup ever, Kyler Murray and Bryce Young, 3rd matchup in the Super Bowl era between 2 quarterbacks listed at 6 feet tall or shorter. The other 2, Kyler versus Russell Wilson, very recent, very obvious. And then there's Bob Berry versus Ed Hargett, Falcons Saints in 1970. We're truly making history with this one. Titans at Colts. This is why it was so disappointing that the Colts blew it against Denver. Their remaining opponents are 8-34, and they are 5-1 against teams below 500. It was there for the Colts to claw back into the playoff race, and they blew it. Jags at Raiders. Forget the game. Just keep an eye on Brock Bowers and Brian Thomas Jr., 1st and 2nd among rookies in receiving yards. Who gets to 1,000 yards first? 49ers at Dolphins. The Niners have missed 28 starts from all-pro players this year. Gonna guess not very many people around the NFL are feeling sorry for them. But yeah, it's no surprise this season's so disappointing when you're facing hardship like that. We'll see if they can get a win in Miami. That does it for the hurry up. That does it for the show. Hope y'all have a fantastic, amazing weekend of football. Oh my goodness. You got pro, you got college, you got Saturday. There's a Friday college game. You got your regular Sunday slate, and we will be here for you on the other side of it. We'll be back Monday, recapping all the action on all of the days, what it means, who are the big winners, who are the losers. You know the drill. Make sure you're subscribed. Go find us on Spotify. Go find us on Apple Podcasts. We'll be here for you as we get ready for a busy Christmas week and get closer to the start of these NFL playoffs. I can't wait. I hope y'all have a great weekend. I'll talk to you then. Thanks.